The terms are absolute and brutal. If the squad fails, their entire families will be erased. They even plan to wipe the family dog off the map. This horrific ultimatum cranks the tension to the absolute max as the mercenaries scatter, moving with lethal precision. However, mall security isn't going down easily. Ruby initiates a distraction and buries an arrow into a thug, but the guy barely flinches. She sinks another arrow right into someone's leg, yet the promise of a massive $100,000 payout acts like a total painkiller.
One with a
for
nail
these
bomb,
goons.
but the dude just shrugs it off like
Eventually, the
nothing.
squad zeroes in
Ruby
on
plays
Ruby's
dead and the
spot
noobs leave
and
without a kill
unloads
shot.
Storm of bullets.
Vance
Acting
hits.
on pure survival instinct, Ruby drops to the floor and plays dead. It works. The rookies move on without double-checking the body. Nearby, Vance chucks a homemade nail bomb at a massive brute, but the guy shakes off the blast like nothing. Meanwhile, two hitmen stumble upon Mason's position. Driven by sheer panic, Mason fries the first guy with a taser and blasts the second one away. When the initial gunfire pauses, Eddie tries to get a status update from his crew. The issue is Mason. He's completely frozen, terrified out of his mind, and pinned down. With no other choice, Eddie pushes forward to extract him, but is instantly met with a barrage of lead, forcing him to dive violently behind a counter. Just as things look incredibly grim, a sliver of hope appears. A standard police cruiser pulls up toward the mall building. This sudden variable creates a nerve-wracking standoff. Thinking this is his big hero moment, Johnny pulls out his flashlight, but the junk refuses to turn on. Ignoring Eddie's desperate screams to stay put, Johnny foolishly steps out into the open. The enemy sniper already has him dialed in, and Johnny takes a fatal round to the skull. We're clear. Eddie begs the remaining crew to keep their cool after watching Johnny drop. To figure out their next move, Eddie desperately needs a visual on the food court, but his team is totally trapped. Mason absolutely refuses to budge. Eddie knows he can't afford another casualty, yet he finds himself completely out of options. That's exactly when little Jamie completely flips the script. She sends her remote-controlled toy car out to scout the battlefield. Armed with this fresh intel, Eddie formulates a desperate tactical plan, ordering everyone to rally at a nearby department store in exactly 3 minutes. Jamie warns him that 5 heavily armed men are swarming his location, but for a seasoned Marine, the odds are fine. Eddie vaults over the counter, using a stunned mercenary as a human meat shield while laying down heavy suppressive fire. Sliding across a slick pool of oil with absolute finesse, he takes out 2 gunmen hiding behind cover. A 4th enemy tackles him to the floor, but Eddie effortlessly snaps his neck and shoots down Frel, who was attempting an ambush. This entire bloodbath takes only a matter of seconds. Vance and Ruby break from their cover, but Ruby catches a bullet to the gut, forcing Vance to lug her the rest of the way. Eddie clears the immediate threat around Mason and kicks the door in. Spooked, Mason fires a wild spray of bullets, narrowly missing Eddie. Eddie grabs the terrified guard, and the two book it toward the department store, with Eddie laying down continuous cover fire until they're safely barricaded inside. Utterly fed up with his incompetent crew, the boss, Charlie, decides to handle things personally. Despite being battered, the survivors find temporary sanctuary. Eddie hands Jamie a taser while she huddles safely inside a giant dollhouse. The enclosed space brings her a sense of comfort, reminding her of her Uncle Will. That was before her father completely cut him out of her life. Speaking from a place of deep regret, Eddie tells her that fathers are inherently flawed. He isn't trying to justify the man's actions, but points out that the truth is complicated. Maybe her dad was terrified of putting Jamie in harm's way, or perhaps he was deeply afraid of his own demons, reflecting on his own personal failures. The young girl absorbs his words. This fleeting moment of quiet is violently interrupted when Charlie's voice crackles over the radio. Mockingly, he asks for a little chat. The crew is cornered behind a flimsy steel door. The villain issues one final ultimatum: hand over the girl. But it's been 2 agonizing hours, and Eddie knows the clock is ticking down to 0. The pendulum swings back when Mason glances outside and spots federal agents swarming the perimeter. The cavalry is here. However, Eddie realizes their radios are completely useless unless they destroy the gang's mobile jamming truck outside. They decide the barricade will buy them time, right up until they hear a heavy engine revving up. Eddie hands off his handguns to Vance, who steps up to hold the choke point. The second the doors breach, Vance unleashes hell, forcing the highly trained killers to scramble. Using the chaos, Eddie slips out and links up with the marshals, who immediately draw their weapons on him. Back inside, Vance is hurling Molotov cocktails, putting his life on the line to stall the advancing strike team single-handedly. Eventually, Vance takes multiple hits and collapses to the floor. Right before Mason and Jamie sprint out to the courtyard, Eddie catches a fatal flaw. From their non-standard combat boots to their neck tattoos, these guys are absolutely not federal agents. Suddenly, Mason and Jamie run outside, straight into the trap. Mason is ruthlessly gunned down, while Jamie scrambles for cover. Furious, Eddie executes the fake cops in the blink of an eye. Losing Mason shatters him. Making matters worse, he realizes Vance is likely dead too. He is completely surrounded, but this Marine always has a backup plan. Eddie tells Jamie to dig through Ruby's gear and find the actual walkie-talkie. The strategy is straightforward. As soon as he wrecks the communications van, she needs to broadcast an SOS on all emergency frequencies. He promises he will come back to get her, sealing the deal with a pinky swear. Charlie spots Eddie breaking away and deduces he's going after the signal jammer. Eddie hotwires a quad bike, but takes heavy fire from a relentless killer nicknamed Deadeyes. A high-speed pursuit kicks off, but Eddie's evasive driving keeps him alive. Meanwhile, Charlie begins stalking Jamie, shouting into the dark, trying to crush her hope by claiming nobody is coming to rescue her. Outside, Deadeyes finally closes the gap, launching himself off his vehicle and tackling Eddie to the dirt. A brutal hand-to-hand brawl ensues. The assassin pulls a blade and slices Eddie, but pushing past the sheer agony, the veteran overpowers his attacker, slamming him ruthlessly to the pavement. Deadeye scrambles for his firearm, but Eddie leaps back onto the ATV and floors it. He drives the four-wheeler head-on into the side of the jammer van, destroying their tech advantage. The airwaves are finally clear. Eddie attempts to reach Jamie, but the enemy sniper spots the opening. Back inside, Charlie discovers a plastic toy radio. It was a brilliant decoy left by Jamie, who is currently on the real frequency begging for police backup. Outside, Eddie scoops up Vance's dropped weapon, blindly fires toward the sniper's nest, and drops the marksman with a miraculously lucky shot. Deadeyes recovers and charges one last time, but Eddie pivots and puts him down permanently. Completely drained and bleeding out, Eddie hits the ground. Inside the mall, Charlie finally locates the real walkie-talkie and hears dispatch actively responding. Knowing time is up, he tries one last mind trick, telling the girl that Eddie abandoned her. He claims he won't kill her, but he absolutely cannot let her testify in court tomorrow. Jamie sprints into the giant dollhouse and locks herself in. Furious, Charlie rips her out of her sanctuary. In that exact second, Eddie kicks through the doors, honoring his promise. He subtly gestures to Jamie, reminding her about the taser. Catching on instantly, she jams the device into Charlie, shocking him. The split-second distraction is all Eddie needs to put a bullet squarely between the villain's eyes. With the nightmare finally over, Jamie supports the wounded hero as they limp outside, where a massive federal task force has secured the perimeter. The cops aim their weapons, ordering Eddie to the ground, but Jamie fiercely shields him. In a massive twist of fate, paramedics wheel out Vance. He somehow survived the onslaught. The two warriors share a silent, respectful salute. Days later, Eddie wakes up in a hospital bed to find Jamie keeping watch. She came to say a final goodbye, assuming she's being thrown into the foster system, and softly admits that Eddie's little girl is lucky to have him. Suddenly, the door swings open to reveal her Uncle Will. Bursting into tears of joy, Jamie runs into his arms while Eddie smiles from his bed. After making a full recovery, Eddie finally returns to his own home, pulling his wife and daughter into a tight embrace, realizing that true family is the most important thing in the world.